When the kid misuses the English language in school, you correct him. You don't say, oh goodness, this is going to wound his self-esteem. The only thing that will reduce poverty is wealth. And the people who create the wealth reduce the poverty. The liberals want to help the poor while they're poor, but really the biggest benefit is to stop them from being poor. And that they have very little interest in.
Thomas Sowell's books and essays on everything from the economy to race relations have been described as myth-busting and a cold bath of logic.
He's fearless, doesn't care what the reaction to it is. The truth to him is the truth, and finding the essence of it is key to him.
And even though he has avoided the public spotlight for years, Sowell's work continues to be a powerful voice for conservative thought in America.
I get thousands of emails a day, and every time he writes a column, I'll get 500 people. You ought to see this latest Thomas Sowell column, but I've already seen it.
Hello, I'm Fred Barnes. One of the reasons for Tom Sowell's continued influence is that even though he's been called one of America's most eminent intellectuals, there is nothing stuffy about him or his writing. He tells it the way he sees it, presenting his thoughts in ways everyone can understand. He rarely gives interviews, but I was able to sit down with him for a far-ranging discussion on the critical issues we face today. What follows is a rare look at this man and his unique take on how to make America a better place for everyone.
Even though he's 75 years old now, his age doesn't show in his face, but rather in the wisdom of his words, words that prominent conservatives like nationally syndicated radio commentator Rush Limbaugh have read for more than 2 decades.
Thomas Sowell's one of my earliest teachers, even though I never attended a class.
Limbaugh credits Sowell's unflinching take on the world with helping to shape his own thinking, especially early in his career.
I've been conservative all my life, and for much of my life I knew I was conservative, but when it came time to tell people why, I sort of reached a stumbling block. And I started reading all kinds of conservative writers, and Sowell was at the top of the list. I mean, there is such a thing as brain inspiration, and he's one of mine.
Sowell's inspiration for a life of academic achievement came from an unlikely place.
I grew up in what would today be called poverty. I didn't know it was poverty at the time. I didn't know I was poor until I got to college.
Born in North Carolina, young Tommy, as he was called back then, was raised in Depression-era Harlem by an aunt and her boyfriend he thought were his mom and dad. Even though he never knew his real parents, he remembers his unique upbringing with great fondness.
I was raised in a family where I received an awful lot of attention. There were 4 adults and 1 child. And I remember once asking my older sibling, at what age did I walk? And she said, Tommy, nobody knows when you could walk. Somebody was always carrying you, you know? And I think back to that, and how different that is from the kids being raised today. They have more material things, but more material things will not do it. I mean, if we'd had twice the money and I'd gotten half the attention, I would have been worse off. The attention and the concern is what counts for infinitely more. It's one of the reasons government programs don't work. They can't create good parents.
What created this drive to achieve so much academically?
Oh, I guess what was the alternative? I couldn't you know, become an idle playboy someplace on inherited wealth. So I had to do something. But I guess, too, I really became interested in ideas early on, and that drove me on.
His background, if you just read a little sketch of it, you would think that he'd be angry. You think he could be very angry at this country, and but he's not. He has just the exact opposite. He's profoundly patriotic, loves the country, and considers this to be the greatest chance for human progress and opportunity in the whole world.
A stint in the Marine Corps gave him an opportunity to pursue his love of photography and later the chance to attend college under the GI Bill, but his interests were far from typical.
You were, in your early years, you were a Marxist.
Yes.
What happened? How'd you get away from that?
I took a job in the government. I went to the University of Chicago as a Marxist. After a year of studying under Milton Friedman, I was still a Marxist. But one summer of working in the government was enough to start returning around.
Really, what happened to you there?
Well, nothing happened to me, but that I realized that the government was nowhere close to being capable of doing what people on the left wanted the government to do. And that, in fact, we'd be lucky if they didn't make things worse. For example, I was in the Labor Department, and they administered the minimum wage law. To me, the question was, did minimum wage laws make poor people better off or worse off? That was not the question for them. The minimum wage law provided 1/3 of their total budget. And they weren't going to look at this other way. And as I tried to get into the question of does this cause unemployment and stuff like that, there was no enthusiasm whatsoever for that whole line of reasoning.
Sowell's early brush with bureaucracy earned him a reputation as an independent thinker, and his name began showing up on short lists for cabinet-level jobs in the Reagan White House.
You've been offered 3 very high-level jobs in the federal government. Not this one in the Labor Department, which is a little lower level, but see, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Labor, and you actually accepted for a period of time a nomination to be on the Federal Trade Commission,
Yes.
but you withdrew it. What happened? I've drawn the conclusion that you don't want to work in Washington anymore.
I don't. I never really did. My conscience troubled me about the Secretary of Education offer because I knew the education was in such terrible shape that really, if I had a chance to do something about it, I ought to do it. But then I thought realistically, I really don't have the political skills to be able to accomplish anything in Washington that would be worth the heartburn that I would go through, quite aside from the heartburn that I would cause other people.
But it was a tempting offer after graduating magna cum laude from Harvard University and teaching at some of the nation's other premier learning institutions, including Cornell, Amherst, Brandeis, and UCLA. Education reform has remained high on his list for improving our country.
You've described the American education system, I think from top to bottom, including colleges, as being in terrible shape.
They are.
And why is that? Other than the standards being relaxed, that's not true at all colleges, for instance, I don't think.
Oh, you can graduate probably from any college in the Ivy League, or Stanford for that matter. I haven't checked the requirements, but I suspect you can graduate without having taken a single course in math, in economics, in history, or in any hard science. I think Brooke Shields created a sensation with things that she hadn't studied when she got her degree from Princeton. That wasn't special treatment for Brooke Shields.
Really?
Anybody can graduate from Princeton as an ignoramus. Now, if they really want to learn something, they can also learn an awful lot at Princeton. But it's entirely up to them.
Well, what about elementary and secondary education?
They're disastrous as well. One of the biggest problems is one that doesn't get talked about, but which is really at the heart of it all. The people who go into teaching are really the lowest level of college students. If you look at the test scores of people who major in education compared to people who major in history, science, anything else virtually, they're at or near the bottom and have been for something like half a century.
What would you do if you were, if you had taken the post of Education Secretary and President Reagan came to you and said, Tom, whatever you want, I'm going to be for?
I would say, well, all right, you've broken the airline air controllers union. Break the NEA and make teaching non-union. That would probably do more than any other single step that you could do.
Well, what would be step number 2?
Step number 2 would be to hire people. Then step number 2 would be to abolish all education schools. I have argued that if we were to spend $1 million getting every professor of education to retire, and not hire any more, it would be the most productive money we have ever spent trying to improve educational standards.
What's the matter with education professors?
Oh, you obviously don't know any, or it would be obvious.
I don't. Yeah.
Oh, the stuff is unbelievably childish. I get emails from time to time from people who are in education schools saying, I can't believe the drivel they're teaching us here. And should I complain to the dean? And so I said, no, don't complain to the dean. What you're getting is the norm in schools of education. It's one of the reasons the schools are so bad. But see, the people in schools of education pay no price for miseducating students.
Up next, a sobering perspective on current events.
The effect of disaster relief is that people locate in dangerous places that they wouldn't locate in if they had to pay for it themselves.
And a wake-up call for crisis mongers everywhere.
Nothing will get you more gasoline in the short run. All you can do is when the prices go up, people will find they don't have to drive quite as far as they used to.
A conversation with Thomas Sowell continues after this short break.